good chance to get some other interested people to be part of the day, so that the kind of questions they raised and all would sort of help steer it, so he didn't just get what we're trying to tell the world, he'd get some of what the world wants to have it explained better, which there must be better ways to explain it. And the other one was just to experiment with. Marcelo's been a friend of ours for quite a while, and he works at SRI as a researcher in their business intelligence unit, and he's taken up a hobby of video, so he could help us with all this. So this is the first time he's taking an experiment and trying it, and all our colors just switched, which is a real bummer. Software package will let us move around from unit to unit here and say what's underneath the box, so we can just go highlight boxes, or we can come back and do a lot more underneath each of those boxes. But time and again we'll come back to this picture, the map here, sometimes with diagrams etc. in the middle, so that what you got as a printout is sort of what you get from each box is followed down underneath it, and you return. And there's a diagram or something filling the square in between. So you don't get all of the traversal that leads up to that point. And this paradigm map, these 15-odd boxes around the perimeter, turned out to be for the best way we could put together what the component concepts are that seems to be important in the whole pursuit that I've been after all this years. And the kinds of component concepts that have had a hard time getting people to see them in the different way I started seeing them. So it's the different way I looked at all of these to end up with what I call the bootstrapping strategy that sort of, you could say, alienated me here, put me on a very different path from others. And it seems more and more gratifying in these last years as more of that seems to be relevant. So it'd be interesting to this is another step in bringing this picture up people to see. So we'll just begin at the beginning and lightly go around once to give you an idea of what's underneath them. And this is to say that high-performance organizations is a way to describe what the objective has been for 40-some years. The underlying thing is saying, how can you get collective capability to handle complexity and urgency more effectively? Feeling there's a tremendous need for that in the world. So that's the objective. And after about 10 years of that, I got time to do a heavy study for 2 years, collected by myself. And out of that came some conceptual framework that is taught all around here, filled in. So one of the very important ones was improve some high-level capability. We're talking about dramatic change, that any higher-level capability. I played back and forth between talking about processes or capabilities, and it seemed best from what I was trying to do to focus on capabilities rather than processes. And so anyway, that capability infrastructure was a very important part of it. Then the next question was, well, where does a given capability infrastructure for an organization or individual? Where does it come from? And it realized, oh, there's a lot of stuff in the technology, of course, but any major change in the technology, what we call the tool system, in the end affects a significant change in the human system side, which is a whole list. We'll go down into that and spend more time because it's such a key part of the whole concepts of this. But that's the skills you have, the particular knowledge you have, the roles, the conventions, the practices, the procedures, the organization structure, and so the thing then one realizes is if you're going to assume that we're going to reach really significant improvements in this, you have to realize that pragmatically you have to co-evolve the two sides. That no one today could, it's my claim anyway, could design the end state for either the technology or the human system at any time, like in 10 years from now. That there's so much to learn that the best way to approach it would be the co-evolution of those two sides. Well, that's going to be pretty expensive, etc. So you're going to spend a lot of money doing it in any organization, and you say, well, I'd like to be able, instead of firing up and making changes and then watching what happens and make another, I'd like some kind of investment strategy that would give me the kind of compound returns you look for when you're making major investments over the years. So that was the point of really looking at it. So this comes out as saying, this is a strategic question. What approach would yield the compounded return on investment? So this is stuff I was swimming in 35 years ago. Oh boy, what is it? So one of the things that came out of that was, well, if you're going to really invest in change, you have to pay attention to the infrastructure that's established within and between organizations that does actually produces the change. Before you say, well, I'm going to make things a lot better, let's look at how the infrastructure that's there for that. And so then a question comes up about saying, well, of all the capabilities that you can go after to improve in organizations, let's just ask the rhetorical question, which set of capabilities to boost the effectiveness of your organization would also be able to improve the capability of your improvement process. And that's the kind of thing, the only thing we could think of that would give you this compounding return. So this is 35 years ago, but all right. The one that really came out was collective knowledge work. So in the last 3 or 4 years, we've realized it really is equivalent to a collective IQ. But we've given the set of capabilities another acronym of CODIAC. And it's concurrently developing, integrating, and applying knowledge. And somehow needed it isn't just efficiency, it isn't just the right information in the right place at the right time. That's not enough to describe how you develop knowledge or integrate knowledge or have it applicable to you. And so anyway, there's a lot of things we'll talk about that today. But if you're aiming towards the kind of technology that could play into this role, you realize that there's certain kinds of requirements. And this global interoperability just rises up pretty soon and overwhelms almost every other architectural kind of basic requirement. So there are a lot of nice, clever things one can do to boost this kind of collective knowledge work. But if you're really looking at where it's going to go, you realize this interoperability issue is really severe. So we got 2 diagrams underneath that to explain that. And finally you get to saying, all right, here's just one box and here's it's a technology thing. And this is something we've just come to call in the last 7 or 8 years an open hyper document system. This is a multimedia hyper structured kind of document system. Is something that really, it's inevitable that something like that evolves in the end. It's open, and that gives you the kind of radical new capability to deal with knowledge. One of the basic things in this is, the traditional way to encapsulate a package of knowledge that's going to deliver to somebody is in something we call a document. And the term document is okay to use if you start changing the literal meaning that people hold in their minds when they use the word document. And so it seems like usually okay. So, you could have called the clay tablets a long time ago a document, and then shift to handwritten paper, and then shift to printed paper, and then shift to the xerography mode of making it, and then computers to do the word processing and printing. But all along there, the public image was in creating the document that's going to be printed. And the pride of all of the applications produced to help you do the word processing was WYSIWYG. What you see on that screen is what you're going to get. So to us, by the time that was all emerging, and we were sort of waving our hands to say, wait, you're forgetting a lot of the potential of how you work with us online interactively, which will increasingly be the way you deal with your documents. So why just anchor and automate the way you used to do it? 20 years ago, in the mid-70s, automation came up, and it just killed us because we kept trying to say, hey, you're augmenting, not automating them. And we just got pushed right off the street. One of the really significant lessons in what paradigms mean and how they affect the world. Anyway, so we'll dive down in here, and we won't get into the technology this morning, except for sort of the characteristics of that, some examples. And this afternoon we can show some demos if that works. But the afternoon we're saying is committed to Bill Christopher for getting what he came together on today, and everyone else sort of gets to get the maximum they can out of the morning. And if the afternoon they have interest of some kinds to follow that suit him, they say, okay, then he's the master of ceremonies in the afternoon. So as far as we're concerned, you're welcome to stay with me. And he's going to be a tough guy to get out of it.
So you'll have the audience and you'll all go home by the time I come up. At least I expect.
Okay, anyway. So,
Justice.
Yeah.
So there's another very important thing. If you're going to make sort of radical technology and try to piece together prototypical application of it, and you start making some games, they will be little hunks of games with hunks of people. And it's going to be very hard to lift the whole organization at once. So the big question comes, and this is supposed to shift over this next window. The big question sort of is, as your new capabilities emerge in modules, etc., what's the best way to deploy them strategically? So that all fits back into this strategic improvement structure. And so something we call network improvement communities. If you look at the features you're looking for in deployment targets, the improvement community sort of thing just comes right out of such a beautiful strategic way to start deploying the early capabilities you have. So that's what will end up in these other two things are saying, okay, you fly through improvement cycles, you get smaller and faster, and so a lot of people are saying, let's improve our product cycle time, and we say, look, if concurrently you can be improving your improvement cycle time, you're going to be even farther ahead like that. So continuous improvement is the same. You just say, all right, you go round and round, but that continuous improvement thing, one of the difficulties I had in reading the literature on TQM and that is looking at the case where you're climbing a hill, it just does very well. But when you have to shift to a different hill, and somehow that kind of improvement process wasn't coping. what I can see. And a big part of what we're talking about is significant shifts. And it's in the physical world where we do multidimensional dynamic things that are happening, and we try to optimize sort of, I say, programs are called sort of hill climbing. And one of the real dangers with the mathematics of that is you get up in some maximum, you say, I'm there, and somebody else says, if you started over here, your maximum would have been higher, because it's like there's various hills in this domain. So if you're climbing the wrong hill, and you get up to the top, and you look over there and see something that's twice as high, you've got to climb all the way down and go back across. So there are some examples of that in our world would be, one of my favorites is to say, suppose the world started using tricycles. All excited and going to ride tricycle. And yes, it's easy to learn, etc. And somebody had this two-wheel thing here, and it would just be laughed right off the street because of, you get on it, you fall over. And you can't explain to somebody how they're supposed to ride it, because very, very few people understand how you ride a bicycle. And yet somehow our world got over it and everyone's riding bicycles. But if you have only an incremental improvement process going, you'll just get a better and better and better tricycle. So how, as these changes are getting radical and they come along, how are you going to effect and give it a culture to see, look, there really is a place we can shift to. And then in some way that isn't too disastrous and inefficient, etc., find a way to make the transition. And it's very, very wasteful if all the big effective organizations die instead of making the transition, and they get replaced. And it's right. Who are the organizations that are going to? So that gets right back to saying, can they make the change? And so you say, well, the ones with the best strategy, you assume the best pragmatically oriented strategy would be the winners. So you say, okay, let's go down, make another pass around here and go into more details.
Maybe just make one point before you do that. You can click on the improvement cycles one more time. And it's just to say that going after the product cycles and the improvement cycles simultaneously, that the cornerstone of all of this is down the lower right-hand box, the collective IQ. The extent that you can be boosting the collective IQ or the capability to have a better collective IQ, that's where you're going to get the leverage to do both of those. And so we'll be
key to the strategy. And this kind of thing sounds kind of hoity-toity or something, but it's real. And we'll get to it and spend. It's sort of like an organization. You say, well, how would you measure its collective IQ? Well, I don't know how you'd really measure it like you do people IQs, in which I'm not so sure I have much faith in that. But you say, in similar ways, face an organization with a new situation, the external and internal part of its world. How rapidly does it get the relevant information, knowledge about that, integrated into a plan, and how rapidly and effectively they marshal and coordinate their resources and move towards accommodating the new changes that are needed. And how smart was that change and the path they're taking? So as we're getting more and more complex environments, there needs to be really smarter about that and start anticipating things farther ahead of having processes. So there's an analogy in my mind that's very clear that collectively we're in some organization, maybe in the nation, and it's like you're being in a vehicle, and it's moving faster and faster through wilder and wilder terrain, and our headlights aren't significantly better about seeing very far ahead, and our control systems aren't much better, but it's getting to be a heavier and heavier vehicle, and so if we don't start getting better at that, we just say, oh, what's the logical probability? Logical probability seems to me that crashes. And since we're getting to be a global world, boy, the vehicle United States crashes, and the whole world goes down. It's just, anyway, that's what keeps them going. Every year soon, I say. Okay, the place I'd like to dive into now is in this sort of augmentation system. This is pretty much what unfolded for me in 1961 or something like that, and it changed immensely. And I was thinking, oh boy, I'm going to sit down and list all the things that you add to a human's basic capability to see what makes him or her work better. And so, of course, as an engineer, I started writing down the tools. And then I started saying, no, that isn't all. I started writing down the rest. And, by an hour and a half later, I felt very embarrassed. I was very happy that I hadn't been able to tell very many people in the world what I really was. And it just convinced me. So I've really been more poking and thinking in the world, etc., like that, and watching and thinking historically as much as I could put together. Before we had any artifacts to speak of, when we introduced, say, fire, for instance, or rough clothing, or very rough tools, and any one of those things, probably with language, the most primitive tribes, people we find have sophisticated languages. So then you say, what's going to happen? They had certainly skills in hunting and gathering, etc., that are quite remarkable. A lot of knowledge about their world, but maybe, customs methods. So they had social structures. And every time something significant over here comes, I guess discovered bronze was a big deal or something. There's quite a metamorphosis on the left. So the Industrial Revolution is supposed to be putting productivity and such together here, made massive changes over here. And so once in a while people mention, well, the digital era is going to be very significant too. Well, boy, from everything I think of, it's like that. It may not be the biggest qualitative change that there ever was as far as the change. So if you've got a very little thing and it doubles, that's a big qualitative change in this world. Maybe our world won't double in that sense, but if you think of the complexity of it and the impact, that I just feel like that our world has never accommodated anything with the transitional impact that the digital technologies bring to it. So that all those sort of customs and just the outlook we have about the world that are conditioned by you read history have all changed. And the purpose of history was to get to where we are now. Instead of thinking of it as, boy, that's a pathway. So
that's a very important point. You bring that out in your writing about how digital technology is going to impact and change almost everything we do, and you make the analogy, the statement that will be changes greater even in the Industrial Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution. And that's a point that I wonder if many people are aware of, or if aware of, would agree with. What do you people think?
Well, I don't think there's any question about it.
Is it that significant?
Yeah, at least that significant.
I agree. I think that the Industrial Revolution has had the effect of, with mass production, you get mass economies, you get mass trends, mass customs, all of these things. With the information revolution, the digital revolution, technology is no longer the limitation on reproducing content. Technology enables you to reproduce content at very low cost. And so then you can get more specialization instead of more mass types of products, types of paradigms. But you also, the digital revolution is, because it embodies knowledge processing and even knowledge tasks, you can find large job categories kind of done away with. It's going to have tremendous upheaval socially, economically.
It's interesting you use the word upheaval. We would have significant advancement, too. You would use the word advancement as well as upheaval, couldn't you? If we use it to change to something better, that's not...
Oh, yeah, but the transition is definitely going to be at the upheaval, the revolutionary side, rather than... One of the real needs for strategy is to try to make the transition as untraumatic as you can.
Well, it's interesting that you make the claim of how significant this revolution is, and the people sitting around the table here seem to agree, but looking around in the world, we sort of get the impression we're in the middle of this revolution, if we are, but not very many people seem to be aware of it.
That's
So we're in a revolution, the invisible revolution in a sense.
I think a lot of people are aware of it, but they don't see it in the context quite. Last night I was at a dinner party and we had a nephew who's in the stocks and bonds business. And the question was, he's with Piper Jaffray and they got caught in derivatives about 6-9 months ago, and it's been a lean time. I said, how are things? And he said, well, it's really interesting. He said, we've got these new computer programs. And it used to be we traded on inefficient markets. And if we did a $5 million bond placement, we would take a $50,000 commission. He says today, the most you can take is a $250 commission on a $5 million transaction. And he says, we've cut 20 times the commission out. He says, I think in the next 3 years, you will not see stockbrokers exist as a class of people. And when you see telephone operators, I mean, it'll be that significant sizing. He says, and it just scares me to death. He's 30 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, up until like 2 months ago, this guy has been fairly confident about his future unfolding as his dad did and as people in that industry did.
It's beginning to become visible, huh?
Was to him.
That's shocking to me because I consider that to be a knowledge work of task. I wouldn't have thought that would have been impacted. I'm thinking about someone running the cash register at McDonald's doesn't need to know arithmetic, doesn't even need to know numbers because they're pressing icons. And pretty soon is when the when the data acquisition systems get good enough where you can have voice recognition, you go up and talk to the speaker, there's not another human on the other end, there's a computer program. Those people are all displaced. I mean, I think we all expect those kinds of jobs to be shifted, but that's really surprising to me.
There's 4 companies that in the last 2 years have put out good training programs. And when he got the one from Bloomberg was when he got excited. And a year later he said, I had no idea it was going to do this to me.
well, but
I think that's going to happen, don't you think, Doug, in essentially all of these industries?
Yeah, and then the question is collectively, as a country or whatever an industry, how do you cope best with that kind of change? I mean, there are lots of different things one could go after. That's why I felt it was important really to think about the capability infrastructure, because this kind of technology is going to impact all throughout that infrastructure, and if you do that, it just kind of revolutionizes what the whole thing could be. So people roles, etc., will just be changing all over the place. And the way like a company that wants to do something, so you could have a virtual company, there are lots of configuration possibilities out of that. But the big thing is that it'll just be very, very different, the way people work together in their roles. And so anyway, this is a big part of this whole thing. So to assume it's very different, how do you go about exploring the frontiers instead? And that's what our next thing becomes.
Yeah, it's going to be a much bigger thing than just a company thing. It's a real social
Absolutely.
issue. You can't just have a drastic change like that. That would cause the world to be in positions that it never thought it was going to be.
It's whole nations, whole markets, and it's kind of a global impact, and if we can't find a way to deal with it collectively, the impact might come out on the other end and be lots of really neat changes. But the change traumas are something that we say, well, can't we think about strategically getting a hold on the kind of collective capabilities that can help us move through that transition more stably and safely?
Two related stories that I think speak to that I'm aware of. One is a lot of the destabilization in Mexico was attributed to the fact that venture capitalists couldn't decide where the best return was and do short-term movements of large amounts of cash in and out of several Latin American countries. And all of a sudden, Mexico was viewed as a not good place to place funds, and that led to the crisis that they had last fall.
Yeah, which affected Argentina just as much.
Right. Yeah, it could affect virtually any nation, is the point. And the other was when Hong Kong was seriously looking a couple of years ago for a way around the Chinese issue. they wanted to buy Baja from Mexico. And the question was, could you put a Hong Kong in Baja? And their answer was, in a digital world, there is no reason you couldn't build a Hong Kong anywhere in the world you choose if you could just get the space.
Except for the gray whales or something.
And it was an incredibly radical idea to most of the governments in the Western Hemisphere. And they were ultimately turned down because Mexico wanted the hegemony in an old political sense. But I ran this loop with, they really could just pick that thing up and move it. And yet we think of this as having a permanence that's cited in political culture.
Hong Kong is what happens in all those buildings. It's not the buildings itself.
But I ran this and said, why couldn't we do a Hong Kong? I mean, maybe they can, but they wanted.
It's difficult enough trying to cope with this change within a company environment, so dealing with world issues.
We'll get down later. That's when we talk about the improvement communities, that it's much too big for almost any company to cope with alone. So finding a way to work together about whether, which is different from saying I'm going to control the environment. That may be something you want to do too, but the sort of mutual support and the evolution. And, so this is what SRI, where these basic ideas evolved, and we had ARPA money beginning in '63, lasting until like '76, and we had a chance to build a tool system that was a coherent environment for this. And then the world, in turning to office automation, such just clearly said you're on the wrong path, and so we lost our support. And 14 of we had 547 people in the laboratory, and gee, we're just a real system that today, anyway, it's terrific. So nobody wanted it to, so I couldn't do much with it except dismantle it if we didn't have any support coming in. And Xerox PARC turned down. They could take the people, but they did not, they just had no interest at all in the technology, the overall technology. They took quite a few component things. So the only thing I could do was organize a raffle. so I sort of put out an auction request, and sure enough, time sharing companies came around and a very low bid won. So I went with it just to keep the system alive, and went to Timeshare in Cupertino, who had the TimeNet operating, and so we had this kind of service we've been selling for 3 years by then over the ARPANET to real world people in the Defense Department. And then we started being able to serve them over the TimeNet too. So we had to build up a little business. And in '84, McDonnell Douglas, in a wild move to say they were going to diversify and get in the commercial world, in which culturally they were not conditioning. They started acquiring computer service companies, and included in that was Timeshare and TimeNet. And so they had about $1 billion a year revenue size information systems group, and way down in this $2 to $3 million a year little thing we really couldn't write. But what that provided for me was a way to start knocking directly on the doors of the very heavy knowledge work going inside aerospace programs. And since I was part of the company, I wasn't viewed necessarily as a salesman, but I could come and keep talking. And I found people that resonated about the architectural practice principles, etc. That we built our system with the client-server sort of architectures and quite a few other things that would design. If you're getting that interoperability issue down there, you see that we were thinking a long way ahead about the architecture. So they actually started a program inside McDonnell Douglas about integrating the architecture for design, manufacturing, customer support, and even office automation. And that got killed a few years later in some high level. We're going to look better on the bottom line stuff. But they also got interested in our kind of collaborative support through these knowledge repositories, Hypermedia stuff, and that and some other pilot operations that, for instance, the Air Force took a pilot operation, excuse a pun or something, but in one of their directives, that they ended up with 5 mainframes running our system, supporting several thousand people, and they could do things in workflow, etc., that still aren't flexible and easy. So it was really a very advanced thing with a lot of experience. And in the later 80s, I've been trying to get this open hyperguiding system, saying, Donald, you can't go it alone. You've got to start getting other people to talk about what that underlying architecture needs to be. And so you get an open common one, because that's the only way you'll be able to work with all your suppliers, and they can work with other people. But I was having trouble getting people interested. So in '89, Christina and her husband had started a business that had run into problems that really one chance out of 2 or something you have if you start like a startup that it's going to hit a brick wall. But anyway, she and her husband said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I would like to set up an independent platform, raise a flag and say, hey, bootstrapping, OHS, things like that, the world's important, instead of belonging inside of some environment where right away there's suspicions when you try to So that's when we founded the Bootstrap Institute, and valuable support keeping alive. So anyway, a year ago we started getting ARPA money again, which we can describe more in detail. But so anyway, we get back to this model up here. It's just more and more real. More and more real to me, more and more examples from all the time of the kind of changes in this left side. So one of the things that it just dawned on me way back there after several months of staring at this is that they're bound to be surprises to us in what things in this human system are valid candidates to change in order to harness better the emergent technology here towards human ends. I keep going. And this is something I've seen over and over and over again, that the candidate changes catch people by surprise. And the example I meant earlier about this WYSIWYG document, we're sailing along thinking that that's a document, aren't we great, because on the screen we see what's on there, and the World Wide Web sort of movement sort of made a big dent in that, and it's giving us a chance to come and show people, hey, how much other thing you can do if you break away from that paradigm. But anyway, those kind of paradigm locks in being free and sort of tying up, you grow up taking all this for granted. And nobody talks to you about the architecture of changing this, except to some extent the process re-engineering that's occurred in the last few years has been doing it, but even they just not really looking at the radical things that are really going to happen. So that was a big part of all through the years, and I'd say the validation comes how often, Christine? About every week, every day, every hour? Yeah. So anyway, we're back to the colors it ought to be. So you go back. Isn't science wonderful? So anyway, so that augmentation system is really a very important thing, and the next thing to go to is to talk about the coevolution kind of thing. And in that, this is the best way I found to try to characterize the kind of changes in there. If you found some way to order the improved functionality that the new technologies can provide, so you could string them out on the horizontal axis, and if you found some magical way to order the sort of innovations in the human system that you can do too, up to some place where you could sort of anticipate from today, you'd have this sort of rectangular frontier. And then you say, well, our organizations are scattered down here, and I'm not quite sure what kind of distribution would be better. There's some organizations that are been really extremely pushing ahead in the human system side, and some that have been applying a lot of technology, and how many are doing both, who knows. with the distribution. But anyway, they're clustered down here, and today's products are sort of out in here. And nobody bring a product out in the market that didn't have a marketplace. So who's going to bring a product out on the market way out here if people aren't ready to harness it? And so you sort of say, well, what's the conscious pursuit of that? So you could look at the whole strategy in a sense from this map of saying, I've got my organization sitting down here, whether it's a nation or a company, and I'm part of the crew that's trying to steer it out into that frontier. So what guidelines do I have? Do I just accept what people come out in the marketplace with products and try to harness them? Do I have any feeling that the people producing these products have any sense of where we're going out here really? Oh, sure, maybe if they have a laboratory, like other laboratories used to be, they set up prototypes, and they can show you the prototype test. Do they have prototypes of new organizational structures and operations that they can show you that that's how they checked out the validity of their aiming in their products? Well, no one that I've found does. So the struggle for market share and all of that is keeping them all clustered. And they can anticipate a lot, and they may invest in some laboratories, but boy, you can't go out and find anybody that can show you a test run of any organizational unit that's out here that's really shaken down seriously to look at the new skills, roles, methods, etc. that you can deploy in that. So you say, well, anyway, you can't fault the marketplace because that's conditioned to fight for market share, etc., etc. So who's responsible? And that's a very simple question. But if these frontiers going up and to the right are moving slowly enough, there are all kinds of organic adaptation that takes place, and you thrush around in there and evolve with it. But if this thing is moving out as fast as it is here, and in 20 years is out of sight, like that, we need a different process if we're going to do something. And other things to look about in here is, I'd say, well, suppose that capital T here in today is a point out there in that space. And suppose a company or a big organizational unit of some kind is going to get out there. So one of the things is saying, what part of the cost in getting out there is in moving horizontally to the right, and what part of it is moving vertically up? And so it'd be interesting to ask you guys, what do you think the relative cost of moving in those two directions is likely to be?
Much heavier on the human side.
Right. That's the kind of thing that doesn't seem to be as a awareness out there in the way that we're all moving.
Well, there's certainly a lot of activity going on in that whole area today under various banners like total quality management and re-engineering and empowerment and involvement and all of those terms. But Doug, isn't your thesis that the digital technology today is way over there on the right, but it isn't being used and applied, so only part of it is being applied, the part that's way over there on the left?
Well, if you think of the fundamental technology, like how much processing power you get per dollar, how much storage power, how much bandwidth you get per dollar, what kind of resolution on screens, that's not being harnessed very well. And you think of putting it together in systems out in here. So this is why I put them very the frontier edges out here. Those are anticipatable today, which by that I meant people can sort of see, yes, that those are plausible sorts of configurations that could emerge, and it takes some research to develop them.
I think you can use that chart to explain why the groupware ideas you had 25 years ago couldn't be funded forward. But I think we had to go through an enormous amount of cultural adaptation at the primitive component level before there could be a groundswell for this moving up the human side. I think that's sort of been the bane of all visionaries. And I don't think the pacing of this industry is, this set of technologies is particularly different in terms of the rate of assimilation over the generations. So, as I've heard you kind of, in a sense, sorry for the missed window, I guess, or the why wasn't this acknowledged or understood? So it couldn't be.
Well,
Almost.
let's just accept that and say, yes, it couldn't be. And then you turn to the future and say, well, look, the changes are going to be faster and faster, the potentials. And if we're always looking 10 years ahead with 10-year-old paradigms, as the rate of change in the technology increases, what's that going to mean in waste?
Oh, well, two quick observations. One is it'll continue to frustrate people like us who sort of see it.
Well,
and it'll also continue to move up.
Well, it'll continue, but
pressure is
you say,
enormous to move it
is
up.
there some strategic way in which one can cope with that better? And that if it's not only the opportunities that are out here, but it's the problems they're going to cause. That if we muscle towards them and suddenly found ourselves in a real problem. So it just seems like socially it would be extremely important if we had a strategy for doing better about getting out in that frontier.
Yeah, I don't mean we shouldn't try. And I think there are reasons to think now might be a propitious time.
Isn't it true? There's a lot of variety out there. Now, looking at this from the point of view of individual companies like Hewlett-Packard or Chevron or Ford or whatever, on the right hand, the human side, there's great variety in how far up the scale the companies are. Like Ford, for example, would be further up than many other manufacturers. So there are some that are doing relatively much better than others.
Right.
So looked at it from the standpoint of individual companies, we're not limited by the general situation. We can do what you're talking about.
Oh, I think there's a strategy to do it, and that's what I've been working on all the years, trying to get a strategy. And these are just the basis for saying the strategy has to account for this. There's opportunity immense, and there's difficulties. And this paradigm shift is the single biggest thing. And so you say, well, that's human, that's pragmatic human characteristics. And what does affect paradigm shifts? So what I've observed is that experience does it. So if you can give people certain kind of experiences, it shifts very much more rapidly than if they just hear about it, or talk about it, or read about it. And the World Wide Web is a really classic, beautiful example. If you're talking about the potential of hyperlinkage with the interface, and I can sit down and pop around the world, the world owes that huge applause.
In a sociological way, war has been enormously powerful agent for change. Maybe aside the carnage, what it really allowed you to do was put in juxtaposition two competing systems based on different technologies often, and the victor was almost always the one who had made that technology move. You can read a history of technology in the world. That warfare was simply the catalyst to change for people unwilling to deal with the impacts. And we're in economic war, and there's one way to look at it today. We're in intellectual wars. It's not the blood concept of war, but otherwise, I think it's a pretty similar confrontation.
Take all that into a lot of dynamics at play. The kind of thing is that, and still is that, if you look in country-wise, the country with the better strategy is going to come out on top finally. So the big thing I'm doing is trying to find who are the people that can talk about strategy in a way that resonates or at least connects with my kind of strategic thinking. So I knock on doors of companies and says, just take me to the person in your company who's in charge of the strategy for investing in your improvement. Investment strategy for investing in improvement. And
short list.
Right. So you say, all right, that's the kind of thing that would make a huge change. Not alone.
2/3 of America in this room, is that what you said?
Well, you get introduced to the chairman, and you go to talk to the chairman, and you say, well, am I responsible for that?
Right.
So you say, boy, if they've got a big investment portfolio of any kind, they certainly have an investment strategy there, and that is a betting a company. But anyway, the need really to look out there is that someplace you've got to get outposts out on that frontier. And so the question of who's responsible, who'll do it is one thing, but you really need it. He says, well, with today's technology, you could probably push ahead and make a pretty advanced thing. So what would you do? What size an outpost? Well, you better not gamble your whole company down. So this is where it comes down into the lower left-hand corner of our paradigm graph, which we'll see later, but how do you deploy early things? So you say, well, I could take today's kind of organizational techniques and push ahead with some new specialized technology. It's not in the market, and have to get some prototypical software released. Well, I could go on up here where they say, let's push on out eventually. So who's going to do that? And why not go way up there? So he says, that's what we need, because if we distributed some outposts out in this territory, we could learn more about telling the big guys with the big wagon train, it's your company or something, how do you steer your way out of that frontier? So if you don't have scouts and outposts, how are you going to tell? And you can't just, universities aren't capable of putting together kind of a real world outpost. You can't do it with big graduate students who spend 2 afternoons a week trying to live in some new collective way. So anyway.
It's a real big challenge. But most of the payoff for a company is where you're going to get the return on the current efforts. And down within the shaded area there's huge, absolutely immense opportunities for companies to improve just by working together collaboratively, regardless of using technology, just getting people to work together.
Yeah. And you say
so that's where companies, I think, are going to spend their time in the sweeping up in the red box.
He really says, well, if someone would find a way also to start moving out here, as well as that kind of collaborative, who's going to win?
We can see hundreds of millions of dollars in savings short term just by working down there. We don't need to spend a lot of time going up into the frontiers.
No, but I hear you. And then there's an associated question I don't think you can ignore, is if any of your competitors finds a way also to start out to that frontier, you can't afford to.
I have a question. But how in the world do you get people to stop thinking short term and look at the long term? I mean, if there are long term gains.
Well, I was going to elect somebody here to worry about that.
Because that's really the problem. I think everyone can talk about this and say, this is what we need to do. We need to think more long term. We need to plan for all these human changes as well as the easily quantifiable technological changes. But until you can find a way to get people to start thinking that way, they automatically go, that's great, that sounds nice, but what about next quarter? What are we going to do next quarter? I mean, I work in a startup company where
that's what you see.
We do pipelines
when you
in 4
say
weeks.
what we're going to do next quarter, measured how?
Well, in terms of revenue, in terms of what new products we're going to bring out, and what kind of revenue is going to be brought back, and that's obviously short-term focus. Right.
It's sort of like telling a person, just work harder and don't worry about any bodybuilding or healthy foods, because that's what you do today and tomorrow count. And will that get you?
That's true, but I think the thing is, especially in these technological frontiers, you're not dealing with the chevrons as much as you are with really small companies like Netscape. These are very small companies that don't have a lot of funds. They have to make a lot of money very quickly, and they have to hope that their strategy gets them to the next year, let alone the next 20 years. So I think it's interesting, because I think the technological advancements have gotten us to the point where they've shortened that cycle to the point where you don't have the big companies who are making the big changes anymore. It's the small ones that do. And they either make it or they don't, and then they die out.
How would you picture this frontier getting explored? What's the process of getting out there and sizing it? organizations?
The sizable organizations,
Knowing that, yes,
they have the advantage because they have the organizations, they have more money, they also have longer product cycles. I mean, Intel is already thinking about P8. They're not just looking at the Pentiums they're selling today. My company only thinks about what we sell this quarter. We hope to be around next year. You know. So
I think we all agree with that. So
Right.
then you come back to rhetorical questions: who's going to explore that? And to me, it seemed like larger user organizations are the only real candidates.
They have to be. There's very few companies like Chevron have been around for 100 years. Very, very few.
Right.
And those are the ones that have got most to lose.
To me, what she's saying is you can take Maslow's chain of personal levels of food and shelter, and then you finally get to higher level needs. I think organizations have the same kind of situation, and startups are clearly at the bottom. Survival's it. And I've lived through a few of those, and I can relate to that. And I lived through the HP experience a lot. And my feeling at HP always was this is going to get larger and larger, and you ought to be able to have some discretionary money for the kinds of experimentation you're talking about. My experience in larger ones is that actually it gets harder at some point the larger you get, because what you do is you discover that anomaly is different. And there's some level at which you've grown out of the startup, but you've still got the leadership who's begun to become aware of these kinds of things. And they're willing to do some experimentation. But as you move to the second generation of management, the game is exactly an efficiency kind of thing. So Barney Oliver, who was, I think you remember Barney, his point was at some point you drive creativity out. Is to say, you find a company of 10 people, you find one genius. Company of 100, you find 2. What's the law here? Company of 1,000, you'll find how many? Everybody says 3, and then he says, if a company of 10,000, how many? And the answer is none. They've all been excised. And I think it's the truth. And so that my point is that the larger organizations aren't particularly open to this experimentation either, as I've found it. And it's just a, huh? Right. So it's almost got to be some advocate who's got enough power to set some things in isolation.
The approach that we're finally taking is rounding the doors in ARPA to say, really consider the role for the government to be pushing stuff out here and saying, we'll invest in the technology thing if private parties will invest in the pilot usage of it and doing it in kind of a cooperative thing. That's, when you get down the bottom there, that's about the only. We tried getting a consortium of larger organizations, and their funding moving out to the right in here, it's a little hard for them to explain inside their world why they should be investing in that. But if they had it, that the kind of response we've had by change makers in those companies is, if the government came out with some of these real things and said they'd like to track the technological support it would take to support some of the outposts, then might be
You could use Xerox PARC as an outpost. PARC was built as a very alter ego part of Xerox. And a lot of people today decry what PARC became, and you did from a different standpoint, that they didn't assimilate the groupware kinds of ideas. But they fundamentally changed computing in a way no computer company even remotely approached. So that was a grand experiment. But most of the books have focused on the fact that they couldn't capitalize on it for the company, which I think is misguided. In a social sense, it's a totally misguided critique. In an economic sense, though, Kearns had a very different view.
Well, I'd like to move on because I feel pretty confident that lost which one is when you get farther down in here, we look and say, these practical issues, we sort of have a strategic framework that says, I don't need a better framework than that to account for all these very real issues. The small guys can afford it, the big guys get status oriented, the government, it's about, just every place you turn. But to say somehow or the other, humanity would benefit a great deal if with the kind of collective IQ aspect of what the potential is to get pursued explicitly and energetically. And so we've already looked at the most payoff sort of thing here, and there isn't more underneath that, more underneath this, but underneath here we do. So this is a fairly simple sort of model.
Are you finding funding from companies? I mean, how do you fund Bootstrap?
Well, we had two different sort of alliance. We got some grant money to start with,
Right.
and then they sort of said after the first year and a half or something like that, well, you guys should be able to go along, because it looked by then like we were going to get a consortium together, and there's really some real momentum on it. And
We had about 10 companies meeting once a month over a year's period, put together what became a ratified membership agreement, and MCC was coming in to help with the legal aspects of putting the consortium together and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, that's how far ahead we got.
so it got launched.
Did that get established then?
Well, no.
The meeting where we were supposed to sign everything was when the Gulf War hit, and no one could travel, and then the recession hit, and no one wanted to leave their organization because they thought their job wouldn't be there when they got back, and some of them were right, they all got reorganized, and so we had to start over again. It was probably 2 years before we could.
But that concept to me could well find that object in these large companies who would say, I maybe don't want to experiment on my company, but I'll tell you what, we can find some funds so you can experiment on collectively.
Right.
Are you back trying to do that now? Or?
Yes.
This is for the...
One of our goals is summer to start launching.
That I think could have real promise.
That's what I think somebody was talking to Ogilvy about, and it would take...
Okay.
But the momentum with the inside of ARPA just got a big boost this week. So that the way our technology now has gotten adapted, it can just sort of fit into the World Wide Web and just give you a spectrum out from it. And suddenly there are people inside there who are saying, we would like to start recording in. So this would make practical thing we're telling ARPA, look, keep supporting it, and let us use that basic stuff to support pilot operations on it.
Which ARPA explicitly would be thrilled if organizations in the private sector or whatever would do something like that. And they get points every time they do a use.
They may begin to have a better cash rate for the private sector as well.
Meet Bob Chet, who's our software guy that builds tools that with this ARPA money we've been able to employ. He comes with years of background and lots of skill in small talk. Programming lots of language. So,
Is that how this is written?
no, not here, but if you stay around the afternoon, the old system is still running, and the thing we're getting ARPA money is encapsulating it in a small talk package that gradually will move more and more function into it. And that gives us very flexible interfaces and other new things. But anyway, coming back to this model, okay, so you've got an organization, and we're talking about the activities, the A category of activities, so we call it. That's your everyday business. And yes, you've got human and tool systems that are integrated into that, so it's capable of doing its everyday business, which can include hiring, training, product development, sales, planning, production, all of that stuff as you go crunching along. And he says, oh yes, but what we're talking about is improving the human and tool systems so the capability for that organization goes up. Well, okay, then you need to recognize this other activity, B, that's there to improve the A capabilities. And the thing here is that it's not necessarily that there are B people and A people, but much of the B activity is an A person putting a B hat on for 10 minutes or 2 days or a month or something like that. And there are, of course, in big organizations, there are people full-time in the B. So then you look and say, all right, we know we're going to have to move out in that frontier, and there's more change happening, we've got to get smarter about it. So we have to improve B's capability. So what do you think then next is? Of course, that we have to be thinking about improving our improvement process. And we say, well, what about D and E and F? And I say, yes. But we note that all of those are doing the same as they're improving improvement processes. So these three categories are doing your business, improving how you can do it, and improving your capability for improving. So we look at that and we say, recognize that if you're outsourcing your B activity, you bring in Ernst & Young or Anderson, something like that, to do that, then your B is their A. So there are a lot of distribution of the A, B, and C kind of thinking out in the world or something like that. But if we just stick to say we have a target or organization of any size, and you start asking questions in there about, do you know how much budget literally goes into B or C, and what the responsibilities are, distribution responsibilities throughout the organization for B and C? And people say, yeah, we got a research department. And I said, well, that's in part of it. See, introducing that into the A is a very important thing too. So who does that? And do you have any kind of, if you've got quality going, a lot of quality in this stuff, the B stuff. And in the quality movement, I was so delighted when I got to realizing how active it was, that it has a C and D. That the quality people are encouraged to go out and talk. And if you win the war, you're supposed to let other guys come to talk, and so you're serving them as a C to say how to do it. So it was just a real delight. And the thing is about saying, all right, if these three categories get recognized effectively, then we have a chance in our strategic picture to say there are strategic things that we can bring in. And so that's...
Yeah, that looks very similar to a rigorous application process management, which a lot of companies are beginning to do quite well.
So then where does the bootstrapping come in? Well, it's like saying, oh, that's sort of a simplified picture. If the things that B activity does that improves A capability could also be fed back to improve its own capability, great, we got bootstrap. That's classic engineering sense of bootstrapping. And the same with C. If B's can feed back, actually improve C also. And a fun thing to think about is if your company is in the business of producing tools, etc., out there in the world, you can feed back from the A output too.
For your point, let me ask a question on the H and T. More emphasis on the T side, or do you see a good balance on this?
There is, we're seeing more emphasis on the H side.
Are you?
Yeah.
Right.
Using all the principles of Daniels, ABC, leveraging that much more than we've done in the past.
ABC, behaviors, and stuff?
No, that's antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. Focusing more on the behavioral side.
But that's a different AD. Does it antecedents, behavior, and consequences? Is that a discipline that someone developed?
Aubrey Daniels is
Oh,
is in the behavioral world, kind of doing a lot of work to bridge, say, a lot of process thinking that Deming was talking about. I think the secret, we see a lot of the secrets being trying to bridge the process and behavioural and the strategic, and that's kind of where we're trying to use some of this stuff. But the human piece is absolutely critical, but you have to think in terms of systems, total systems.
That's the thing, because a lot of organizations are pushing in the technology, and they're also pushing in the process improvement and that kind of thing, but they're divergent, and they really should be supporting each other and driving each other.
What was that A again?
Antecedents.
Antecedents.
these are all your things you say you're going to do, your policies, your warnings, your directives. A lot of the stuff you had in some of the stuff you had in your H column, policies, I think are more tools type perhaps. We've done it. Well, that's a whole different thing.
Okay, has anyone ever pointed out the parallel between your paradigm and Gregory Bateson's in steps to ecology of the mind? Because A is equivalent to his zero-level learning. A stimulus field forces you to do something and you respond to it. Market research tells you to shape your product a certain way. B is equivalent to his level 1 learning, in which you learn things that are outside the immediate stimulus field because you've learned over time that you have to be able to respond more flexibly. His level 2 learning is learning how you learned to learn outside your stimulus field. And he tries to take it up to level 3, where you try to learn how it was that you learned to learn outside the immediate stimulus field.
That's really interesting. And I look at that and say, well, let's see. Where does the knowledge come from that you're learning or something? So I got to be more like I'd like to talk about that knowledge process. You've got to develop knowledge and integrate things and be able to apply it. So in the middle of that someplace is definitely the learning. But the focus, it seemed to me that if we're going to be able to do something to harness the technology, it comes in managing the knowledge products. And so I don't find any, I was very pleased when I found out about the Bateson thing, sort of concurred. And, a lot of activity going on about the learning organization and such, and I don't know how, I definitely don't want to push it away, and I don't know where it fits in, but I really feel very much wedded to the talking about knowledge and its acquisition, management, production, integration, access, etc., and the ability to apply it.
I find that parallel good, and I guess the question I pose for you all is that where I see this breaking down, or maybe insufficient is the way to say it, is on the decision-making process. It's one thing to build a lot greater learning, but it's organizationally you've got to have a decision structure too. And I assume you're going to deal with that, but the dilemma I've always seen stated best is by Don Michaels, and he put it out. The paper I remember is who decides in a true learning organization.
Yeah, these are aspects of it that I'm talking about the bootstrap, and it's how do you improve the decision-making process? How do you get it to do it? So I'm talking about how do you improve it, and yes.
Well, one is how do you build the base factual structure so that you're more knowledgeable and more aware.
Well,
and I think that's a critical ingredient. But this other is, okay, given that you've done that, and you've got a fairly widely knowledgeable at these 3 levels of knowledge, now how do you apply hierarchy and authority, and who's got the power base
is effective. Let's go down a little bit. If you can come back to that question later. I have more things to point to.
Okay, if you could answer that for me, I would be thrilled. Have you run across that problem?
No, but it makes me think immediately of the research that's coming in from the Asian companies with consensus-based decision-making, which has an interesting effect on diffusion and new practices in an organization, because it takes forever to get the decision made. But once the decision is made, everybody in the organization is the champion. You no longer have the isolated champion reporting to the president saying this is how much progress we've been able to achieve against the resistance, because the resistance isn't there thanks to the consensus process.
There's a fellow who studied that a lot and written about that, and he built it around several of the Japanese companies. I don't recall his name.
Bill Ritchie?
Well, it's not Bill. Maybe it'll come to me. But I agree with you. That is one thread that is suggested. But it does have that attribute. It takes forever. But once done, it's a cemented decision.
Yeah, but sometimes it doesn't take forever because the decision really
it takes a long time, let's say.
is that good decisions are less a matter of authority and more a matter of information, because what you're looking for is the best decision for the circumstance you're dealing with. So the art is to find the decision. And group processes are very good at finding that kind of a decision.
Some of the things that we're dealing with that are real similar to this is we're going through a lot of our worldwide system changes, but coming up against the same things when we're having the technology, but the human element of systems aren't coming, is still very divergent, and coming across some of these same concepts about the C level of work. And we find that there's a lot of inhibitors to that organizational learning and knowledge capabilities. And one of the other concepts that we're working with simultaneous to this is some of the work out of Peter Singer's Fifth Discipline book and the systems mapping. And I think it goes right along with this because you start looking at the behaviors in a system. And it's not just the behaviors, so you've got to get down deeper into that and the reasoning behind the behaviors to get down to what so you can have you can have interventions if you need to. So it takes a lot of, it's a real struggle. It takes a lot of trust building. It gets into that whole dialogue of sharing information, what's really behind the behaviors in a system to get beyond that.
And the inhibitors are they're on the human side?
On the human side, yes. The whole defensive reasoning versus productive reasoning, the political issues, just the fear of change, a lot of it, sharing knowledge, the power, all those kinds of things. Sometimes you find that your reward system is driving something, a defensive behavior as you're trying to change your system. So you start looking at
Oh, really?
you start looking at the other parts of your system that really need changing to get to that point. Yeah, the cultural
organizational culture.
So the intriguing thing is say, all right, we're starting to have some new sort of knowledge potential here. How do you integrate these different observations that are experiential knowledge, et cetera, into an ever better description of how you should go ahead, accommodating all these human characteristics, resistance, but also the different approaches.
I think we're kind of a middle company, very medium-sized company. So we've been through the part that you're talking about 10, 12 years ago. We were a small startup company and very short-term focused, but it was very successful for 10 years. And then, I think what they found out is because they didn't think long-term to what you're working on, it was so successful for so long, and all of a sudden started facing some real financial hardships, hardships developing new product, really being competitive with the marketplace, and went through about 3 years of tremendous struggle, total management change. Now, instead of the startup management people, we have some people from very long, mature companies, long-term successful companies as managers, but we're butting up against this cultural issue. So you have some top executives from very mature, successful companies. The old culture is still fighting that, resisting that, and it's a tremendous change, and I think we're experiencing the upheaval you're talking about.
Plus you've got several cultures represented in those top managers.
Exactly. Yes, they have. Yeah, we do.
TI is really different
TI,
than
HP. We do.
I think one point maybe to make here is that what we're talking about is capability, decision capability, all kinds of capabilities as critical parts of the capability infrastructure that you're going after improving in your organization. And these kinds of improvements are much more complex, I think, than what people have attempted in the past, the total quality, all those kinds of things. And so we can't use the old methods of improvement to be improving these. We have to get better at how we improve things. And all of these things we're talking about, an underlying enabler is what we're saying, that cornerstone of the collective IQ, the knowledge management and utility inside of the organization, quality of the knowledge, and how people can access and get what they need their hands on at any moment in time is an underlying enabler to all of that.
I think the analogy that you used fits our company very well. A few years back, we started the continuous improvement program. Made some very good incremental steps, got people thinking along the right ways, but I think it comes to a point where you realize you're climbing the wrong mountain. And, those things are all good, but not the radical change that you need to get to move to the other mountain.
Yeah, well, you really have to do both, don't you?
Yeah.
So it's a constant process of improving whatever it is you're now doing and finding the right new things.
In the mountain, you're shaping the mountain continually. I mean, you optimize something that, when you started the process, was a legitimate target, and when you get there, your business has changed. And
Then you have to do something else.
Your time has come, Doug. It's really great. What a great field to be in. If we could live to be 150, this would really be solved.
150. Faster than that, just by this definition. Things are changing that fast. If we don't solve it within 150 years, we won't be around to solve it.
And the faster we solve it, then the faster it'll all happen. Maybe we can do it
Well,
again.
actually, you never solve it because you solve it.
That's exactly.
Now, my generation and Doug's generation, we dealt with the problems we had at that time. And by any objective measures, we did pretty well because our growing up experience was we didn't have anything. We didn't have money in our pockets. We didn't have food in the refrigerator. We didn't have the refrigerator. And now all those things are taken for granted now. But we made other problems solving those problems.
That's right. So this is
See,
all.
Bill, it's really nice having another grown-up. Well, you have, okay. I think I'll just dive way over this improvement community and then go back here, just to put into context what across this row and deploying and such is sort of aiming towards. So we say, well, the system goes to sleep every once in a while. Maybe that's maybe you guys doesn't the action guys wake up. So anyway, this is back to this basic ABC. And B is improving the product cycle, and C is improving the improvement cycle. That's sort of one way to look at it. So you say, all right, this is one of the divisions in my big corporation, or this is a company there like that. And you set it up there as saying, okay, it's there and it's got these problems. Well, down the street or across the country or something like that, there's another organization, or very similar ones. How many we might find that really say, we probably have to go it together on some particular vector of improvement like that. So you just say, oh, what a neat opportunity. Look, if we just say, let's get an improvement community, an alliance here, that we do the C work in common. And we sort of begun to call this thing a network improvement community. The assumption is if you get these guys networked together and you start using the nicest advanced collective IQ Kodiak capability employed in this C activity of it like that, look what it avails you of. So there are all kinds of things that fall out of that that are very nice. And we can go into that later. But this, when we go back now talking about more about Kodiak, we just sort of say, oh, if you really got it working here, say the 2-3 people from each of these organizations that's trying to help organize and cope with this in here, and the steady flow of stuff from the B people of lessons learned and needs and their involvement in generating a sort of knowledge reference base that becomes an electronic handbook for how you do your B jobs better. And the kind of a situation where the B people, it isn't that some consultant comes in and says, this is what you ought to do. It's down in here's the practice we're doing with the way we're managing the knowledge and generating, putting it together. We show you can participate in that. So when you turn around to talk to the A guy, it's not coming in and saying, this is how you should do it. It's a lot more like, this is how we're doing it here, and it can relate into your work, and we can show you because we live that way. But the thing that it's just terribly hard on your, some guy comes in and says, I'm going to tell you how you really should do your work. And he's got the same kind of work going on in his place, the same kind of knowledge work, but he's using some old-fashioned way, but he's going to put some product out on new approach. And it's just, something's wrong with us. But anyway, that's one aspect of this plan, that the transfer on up the line. And who knows, everybody knows who his customer is. This C activity has got some very explicit, the B activity. These organizations are encouraged to find a much more explicit expression of who at what times of their working days are putting the B hat on and be involved. And the B should have a clear picture of their customer, the A. So this is good doctrine anyway today. But there are things, quite a few things that fall out of this network improvement community idea that just drive us. So what kind of early prototype technology-based Kodiak support system and could you bring into this that would really start making it go? So that's the kind of thing we've been aiming at for many years. So if we go back around the loop over here to this collective IQ, which remember the term we used, the Kodiak term. So this came out as being the single best candidate for the collection of activities or capabilities to pursue that would meet the strategic investment criteria that we were talking about up here. So this is all right. So Kodiak was our answer about that.
And that really the answer is starting. It's not the if you do the things all the way down to the starting point that enables and leverages the other things.
You get some great payouts from doing that, and that helps to keep the activity alive. But there's lots of challenges in there.
And every improvement in that capability you can get into the A activity is a real plus. Almost everything you're thinking of, market planning, product planning, sales, engineering, right. And so also in the B, also in the C. So that's why it had so much appeal.
Well, my sense with the diagram you drew prior to this, and even the Kodiak label, is essentially technology independent, or it could be thought of as technology independent. It's an organizational view of how you would organize activities.
Right.
So you don't have to be espousing any particular underlying database or set of mechanisms.
Right.
Well, actually,
and as such, how popular has that been? I guess would be the question.
Well,
do people embrace it?
The different classes of people that you meet. That the techie guys, well, they want to drive right down into it and talk about that. And you say, wait a minute, we want the purpose behind what your technology is supposed to support. So, and the
concept of operations. Novel.
And people from the human resources with social backgrounds, social science backgrounds, and stuff like that, and cultures, they keep looking and they keep somehow saying, well, the communities of practice and a lot of really neat terms they use like that, but we're talking about this coevolution. You have to marry both of them. So neither camp seems to resonate. It's sort
really?
of like, right. In fact, I was in a really interesting panel discussion on an educational TV thing that was being broadcast out. So each of us, 5 or 6 of us, had an hour presentation. There was video recording that, and that was typed out, lots of input from it. And then we all 5 or 6 sat there for an hour in the panel. And 2 or 3 of the others were very strongly in the culture and sociology of it. So I said, well, let me ask a question here.
There was a sociologist and an anthropologist.
Oh, okay.
And I'll just as soon not name them because
I was so wrong-handed.
Well,
Shameful.
it's like it was a gap, so I said, here's a question interesting to me. You asked the same question you did earlier here. When you get out to that future world, what's the relative cost is going to be of moving a human system, as I described it for a minute, versus a tool system? And everybody else on this panel, the technology is going to be the cost.
Really?
Yeah. See? So
the humanists of the group thought it would be the technology cost.
Well, the difference is probably we have accounting numbers for the technology side and we don't have them for the human side. So it's going on and it's costing a lot of money, but we don't count it, so we don't know it's there.
And one of the big paradigms that needs to be blasted is that the human side is not so much a candidate, that we'll get the technology in there, and then people will adapt to it naturally. It's the natural evolution theory.
I read that in Engelbart's papers. That when you get a scale big enough, it's going to change everything else. So that's a principle. But Doug, isn't there a big C community out there right today?
Oh,
You mentioned that everybody doing A is also at the same time doing some B, and everybody doing B is at the same time doing C.
Absolutely, you go to a
feedback causes
professional
that to
society,
happen.
professional conference,
So
that's
take,
C.
take the ASQC, for example, and Association for Manufacturing Excellence, and all these other organizations are doing a lot of C work, and they're communicating it not through OHS, but through old-fashioned documents that are actually printed out and mailed around, or seminars or
Months
whatever.
later,
People talk to each other as
They
well.
talk to each other, yeah.
and the real work gets done in the bar or in the hallways. But
Yeah. So there is a big C
no
community out
question.
there right today.
No
isn't there?
sense in trying to imply there isn't. The thing is, looking at that infrastructure and then saying, oh, if you could improve that improvement infrastructure with the same kind of future things you're trying to get improved, wow, look at that. So you can look and say, a professional society is essentially a distributed improvement community.
Mm-hmm.
So you said, put them on the network with the kind of modern features that are like that, and look how much faster they can do and how much better the transfer is. So that's that. But whether or not you can go take a big existing professional society and change it looks like the early ones. You can go recruit some new communities that say, hey, we'd like to gear up and make this kind of augmented C community thing, augmented improvement infrastructure really work. And that's the kind of way you'll get outposts out there, because the C community is a beautiful outpost.
Typically those communities are very small. They seem to only touch...
Which communities?
Any of the C communities. They only touch a very small part of the population, either within a company...
And a small slice of the issues.
Yeah, I've found two things. I spent a lot of time trying to build a C community, as you know, at HP, just like that across engineering. And I ran into all the I don't know about all, but I ran into a whole lot of inhibitors, just like you were talking. The problem I see in general is that moving from C to B to A is if they've got department labels on them, that there are boundaries built that sort of negate the ability of that group to pass information. And I assume you're going to talk about a lot of how the collaboration across those can be facilitated with this system.
This is the kind of things that evolve in those committees he's mentioned for the year, people realizing who's going to populate the C community, the activist core. And we finally found out, we finally isolated and called them interns. That they have to come from the B community.
Right. That's what we
so that when they go back, they have to be recognized as they're part of us.
You've got to have that us in the column as opposed to this way. And that's what professional societies tend to do is say you'll derive your gratification from your peer group and not from your column.
Oh, no, this column is who's customer and stuff like that, and that's your allegiance.
That's the nice thing that startup has is it's very focused on the column. It just doesn't go very deep.
Why shouldn't all these things be done by the same person?
It's just it's a question of scalability, I think.
There's no reason why you can't have these different hats on.
Yeah, I think they probably should, but you have your senior leadership. That's a role of leadership to allow.
Oh, you need some senior leadership time down there in the C, for sure.
But on this department interfaces and barriers, isn't all this recent emphasis on process management sort of puncturing those barriers or reducing them or eliminating them?
Not the companies that read the books and take the time to do it, sure. That's not my experience.
I think the concept is getting out there, that taking a process view versus a functional view, but it's very difficult. That's where the cost, I think that's part of the cost in the human part of the system, is the time to go through that change.
And this is one of the things that is so important about the improvement infrastructure, the improvement cycle and how good you are at your improvement process, one of the key things is how to get through those barriers faster, how to bring people along faster, how to change their paradigms faster.
Well, we draw organization charts of a company that has a CEO up here and then the big triangle, and then we tend to think that way, but that isn't how the company works. That just says who reports to who in the company. But now we're getting models that show more how the company works. Some kind of a operating system.
That's the very first thing that unfolded for me way back there. Is a really significant change comes probably from cross-functional committees, etc. That really have to be more than just a authentication committee. So that's why I just started saying, well, that's great. That it's more like the collaborative support for communities is just as important as that for a line project.
One of the, I just can't resist because you're still believing that the world is rational. I've just got to say this. The thing that I see that upsets large companies is trauma. Let me give you kind of a specific current example. Trauma. Boeing did $31 billion worth of business 2 years ago. They did $16 billion this year. Okay, you can't take a company of $30 billion and cut it in half and have people stay rational. And they put a lot of change agent stuff in, a lot of re-engineering stuff, and they read the good books, and they basically made a lot of decisions that when they shot the 8,000 people that made those decisions, the organization completely was headless. And they've gone off, and it's just bizarre what's happened up there. They've gone back to software technologies of a decade ago and said, we're going to make sure those transfer forward instead of dealing with stuff that works today. They've gotten rid of the people that manage all of the forward progress stuff.
That's interesting. I saw
that. It's just, I mean, I can't believe it. We're going to have an airframe manufacturer that's going to go, I think, right over the cliff. But they think they're doing great stuff.
It gets back to the issue of short-term goals and how you manage the long-term process by making not short-term goals but short-term commitments.
Digital did exactly the same thing 5 years ago. IBM did a variant of that.
But now digital is doing very well right today. How did they get back on track?
Digital's doing very well with one slice. They're completely out of most of the businesses that they were in.
Well, the businesses they were in aren't there anymore.
Aren't there for them. I mean, HP's got them. So the point is, what they've got right now is a superset of semiconductor technologists building a 64-bit computer. They're out of the networking game, they're out of the operating system game, they're out of the software and applications game. So they've capsized most of who they were. Yeah, they've survived. Some set of the kids have survived, the people have survived. But all of the people doing this training stuff and this infrastructure stuff. Bill Johnson is a specific example. Probably the leadership thinking, old BJ, he's up at IBM now working on disk drives. Yes, what happened here? So, all I want to say is this all sounds good until you smack on that wall. You lost every one of your founders. Out of 9 people, it's 9 for 9, okay, in a 24-month period. And you say, what's Mentor Graphics now? Don't recognize a soul. Bring in a whole bunch of new people from other places. They do good work. They might even look at the system. But for the people that have been there 8 years, it's like, whoa.
And most of them are leaving.
And
most of them are leaving.
And I think that's a very unstated issue going on in American industry.
I tell you, I've watched it. McDonnell Douglas went through that same thing. The stock went way up. God, look on the inside, and it's anyway. So
HP shot 17 software divisions. Packard gives it 2 pages in the HP Wave book. Just, oh, by the way, we found that we had this little bureaucratic committee forgets to name the fact that the COO ran it. That was set up to run the company. The 15 top technologists, 2 are left at the corporation. Shot 17 divisions, and they get credit today for being the best managed computer company in America. You got to be shitting me. I mean, it's crazy. It's the best managed short term. company around hardware.
Well, we got this downsizing idea going on, which is not a very good idea, basically, from that point of view, because it's accomplishing what's done, not having clearly in mind what the future of the company is and what they need to do today to continue to be successful.
Yeah, all I want to say is I just want to explode a little bit and say this all makes some assumption that people are rational.
But I want to connect that reality with the previous point about what is the connection between tools improvement and human systems improvement. I think there's an intimate connection there. As a manager of people, I think of what you're saying about the primacy of human systems improvement in terms of depreciation. If I invest in those people, 6 months from now, half of them are gone. A year from now, 3/4 of them are gone. What are the tools available to me to bring up the knowledge and skills of those people fast enough to make it worth my while to do the improvement? Otherwise, I've just improved it for someone else to do. Well, I think the tools that you're developing allow that improvement process to be accelerated. And then I'm willing to invest in it because I can see that in a month or two, I will have people that are performing at a higher level and able to participate in collaborative decision making. But with the traditional techniques of human resource development within an organization, given the pace of turnover in a technology organization, I would say I'll just try to hire the best people because I won't have them long enough to really improve them.
So if you get an infrastructure of tools and practices, and that's what you invest in, that's what's going to persist.
And the legitimacy that comes from tools like the web. For some reason, the web is legitimate, whereas all kinds of online systems that people might have used before it were for the nerds. And so you use the web as the metaphor for how within the organization you can use similar tools to learn a lot faster than you would have learned otherwise.
And a very important part of that, though, is if your knowledge base evolves, that means that people that leave, that if the methods and processes were appropriate, there's a lot of that knowledge that didn't go away with them. So that's a big thing. And you get something like a 30-year aircraft cycle like that, you can't depend anyone from. Even in the old days, that. So if you're going to make a field modification, and you find, that somebody after that was part of the design once, and they threw it away because it was a big flaw. Those kinds of things, there is a potential for having that be a very important part of it.
Yeah, but on the human side, you're improving the individual, but you're also improving the group. And to the extent you're improving the group, individuals leave, the group is still there and still performing. So, and the individual has contributed to the group, and a new individual comes in, becomes a part of it. And we're doing more and more of that because work gets done by systems and groups and so on and so. And then, of course, the group gets the identity of the group, and they're there for some purpose, and they can believe in it and get excited about it and enjoy it.
I'll tell you what gets left behind, using the analogy, the military analogy. In the Vietnam War, we needed a lot of paramedics in the field fast. There wasn't time to train them. For the first time, we really developed algorithms of triage. And we would show them the flow chart of how you quickly get to the diagnosis, and then you look in the book and you see what the field treatment is. When the war was over, those algorithms came back to medical school. And now physicians are being trained from the same decision trees that were first used in the field. So you leave behind the process knowledge, even though the individuals keep turning over.
I think I've got a feeling it's not quite as easy as that. Transferring knowledge from one person to another is not just a question of having that, even in document form. A lot of knowledge never resides in a document. A lot of knowledge people can't explain.
Well, that particular example was a very big study of the results, at least the one I'm thinking of the Korean War fatalities versus treatments. So it was based on a lot of empirical stuff built into the inferencing, and the algorithms were refined quite deeply.
The medical training is completely different these days.
And I think in that, so I guess my point would be in that case, they really did try to capture a quite sophisticated process in a deep way. But I think your point is valid that most of the time we don't go to very much exploitation for these things. And I think that is a role that these systems deploy heavily. is to reduce that to more knowledge that might be resident in the system.
But knowledge also is just one part of the human system. I mean, adopting your model here, I think what I hear you saying is if you hire someone in and you train them, sure, you're giving them knowledge, but there's also something else that's going on in terms of the customs, in terms of attitudes. And humans are not as interchangeable as the parts in Ford's Model T. When someone leaves a group, the group doesn't remain, the group changes because the composition changes. When someone joins a group, the group changes. It's much more of a dynamic system, not interchangeable. And I think those are some, I mean, if you can solve the knowledge problem, that's great. And if you can use a tool system to help you solve a problem in a human system, that's great, but still it's only part of the problems in moving that frontier of the human system.
But the whole business of moving is what do you learn and the knowledge about how to do it better, etc. So that's what we're talking about. That if you're going to try and cope with all that problems, the better you can do your collective knowledge work, the better you can put it all together and learn by lessons and such. Anyway, so it's not saying that the answer is going to be that all you need is Kodiak at all. It's just saying that the payoff from improving that and investing it in the improvement process should help the improvement process for wherever it's going. So however your organizations are, however you handle those problems, it's a thing of collectively finding out better ways to cope with the real world problems. And, so maybe what time is it now?
We should probably let you give the presentation.
Well, I was having a lot of fun seeing you guys do it.
I was going to suggest maybe a short break and then that's good.
Okay, good idea. 5 minutes?
Sure.